This is a Guide Your Light network production, creating podcasts with purpose.
Hello, I'm Maritza Barone. Welcome to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. Has there ever been a moment in your life where you heard, read, or were told something that you simply could not unhear?
Something that made you stop in your tracks and helped you to see the world differently in some way, a better way. On this podcast, we create those life-changing moments for you through interviews with some of the world's most profound people around the globe. We explore groundbreaking ideas in health and well-being.
What we're really doing is getting to the root cause of your symptoms. And often we find that that is an emotional block that we have been carrying around in our body that's become almost crystallized and created a physical symptom.
Relationships.
And for women as well, when I talk about respect, it's called respecting yourself, which is don't overgive. Women will tend to put themselves one down, and then wake up at 40 and go, wait a second, I am woman, I deserve respect.
Personal and professional transformation.
This is true of any skill. You only develop it by doing it. And so, if you don't get out there and just start doing it and being a bit rough around the edges at the beginning, you can't work on your craft. And so it can't turn into something.
Spirituality.
Because I think when we know who we really are, we think we're our name and our body and our form and our hair and our clothes and our skin and but when we know who we really are as infinite beings, we're free.
And so much more. So settle in. This might just be a big day for you where you hear something that changes your life in the most transformative way. Hello, welcome back to Things You Can't Unhear. Now, if you are a parent of a teenager or a guardian or someone who wants to understand the minefield of parenting, this episode is for you. By now, I'm sure most of you know that I am a mama to 2 daughters, and I have learnt that every single stage of parenting needs a whole new how-to manual and a whole new set of tools, understanding and perspective shifts. That doesn't seem to really exist in the form of a manual, so the closest thing I could think of was to invite one of Australia's leading parenting experts to the show. Author Michelle Mitchell is joining us today, and she's going to talk to us about the wild ride we call the teenage years, and also the tweenage years, the years that lead up to the teenage years. It has been a while since I was a teen, and I have a sneaking suspicion that the world has changed a smidge since then. So for this episode, I wanted to be able to share some of your family concerns or hiccups potentially that you're having within your household with Michelle too. So I put a call out to hear from you, our listeners, on what you're experiencing with your teen to get some helpful advice that might create some more harmony in your home. So you'll get to hear those specific questions during this conversation with Michelle, who I might add has a terrific knack of making us parents feel less alone in all of this. Michelle has written a brand new book called Tweens, What Kids Need Now Before the Teenage Years, plus the well-known books A Girl's Guide and A Guy's Guide to Puberty, plus several other leading parenting books focused around well-being. She's so great. She's also a regular parenting speaker and commentator, so we are in very good hands. Let's jump right into this eye-opening and supportive conversation to help us up-level this parenting minefield. Welcome, Michelle Mitchell, to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast.
Oh, Maritza, thank you for having me. This is a fun moment in my day. I can't wait.
Yeah, well, we made it happen, and I need you. I think a lot of us need you at the moment. We need someone to help us through the difficult years, is what I'm starting to learn that they are. In parenting, we go through different phases, don't we? There's little babies, and they have their challenges, and then we have toddlers and they have their challenges, and then obviously as children get older, there's other things that pop up. And I've got a cousin who has children maybe 10 years older than me, and they always say to me, small kids, small problems, big kids, big problems.
But yeah, I'm really thrilled you're here. I have a lot of friends and family who have children in their tweens and teens, and we're all facing similar issues and concerns. So welcome, and I'm glad we can have this conversation. I'm sure you can help.
Oh, I hope so. I think of parenting like climbing different mountains, and we've conquered the same baby mountain and the toddler mountain and maybe those early primary school years, but get into those tween and teen years and they're very different mountain climbs. Just say a child from, say, 9 to 12 as opposed to 13 to 17. They are really different experiences. And like any mountain climb, the sights and the smells and the conversation and the terrain is different on the journey. And we have to prepare ourselves for what those two climbs look like.
Yeah. And you know what? So often we don't. And we get to these stages and I've started to really acknowledge with mine, my children are nearly 12 and 14, two girls. And I say to them, I've not done this before. This is new to me. If we're facing some challenges, please be patient with me while I try and figure out the best way to react. Or if I do react in a way that doesn't serve me or them, I will go back and apologize and confront what I've done and take ownership.
And kids are so fair, aren't they? I think when we're really honest and we speak to them in that way from our heart, they really do embrace us and give us a bit of compassion back, don't they? But our kids are always a few steps ahead of us, so we don't often see it coming and it just creeps up so quickly, especially in those tween years. I think we kind of see them as kids for longer than they actually are because so many of their changes are happening internally. And we're looking for, maybe that first pubic hair or our girls to get their periods as this sign of them growing up. But they not only experience those biological changes, but they experience like cognitive, social, emotional, sexual changes all in the same life-altering way. And it's such a speedy development time that parents can find themselves in a spin. Parents often say to me, 11 is hard, Michelle. 11 is not what I thought it was going to be. This is a wild ride.
Why 11 in particular? I have an 11-year-old and there are those, those peaks and troughs of good moments. Why is it that tween age, that's considered a tween, isn't it?
It is. Development hits our kids differently depending on the child, and they can be accelerated in one area of their life and quite underdeveloped in another. So we find ourselves nurturing this gap. But I think what makes 11 hard, I really do, is because development is hitting them in such a diverse way. Then they've all got to go to school and get along. Yet they're sitting next to a kid that might, have breasts and they don't, or might be socially very aware and they're still like, kicking a soccer ball and feeling like they're best friends with everyone. It's so diverse, which makes their life really challenging.
Absolutely. So your background, you have worked as a teacher and then you saw a problem and you went out there and tried to fix it with what you saw. I'd love to hear your journey and how it all unraveled.
It makes me laugh now that I'm 50. You just don't think the same way at 50 as you did when you're 24. I wanted to be a teacher. I did a teaching degree. I taught for 4 years. And it was like one of these things doesn't fit with the other one. I was not as passionate about whether E was on the end of a word as some of my colleagues. And that's kind of fundamental to being a teacher. I really cared about kids' well-being and I was very passionate about seeing them, like socially develop. And so at 24, I quit teaching and started a charity, and I started offering myself to schools free of charge to run small group programs for girls that were at risk of dropping out of education. And that grew over 25 years. I had a psychology clinic with 12 staff. We did a lot of work on site at schools, but also from a private practice. And it became quite a big endeavor to run. I was always speaking and began writing, and that became sort of the thing that I felt like I needed to step into when I was, maybe 40.
Yeah, well, you've done an amazing job. And even one of my daughters brought home your book the other day and the school had handed them out and I sort of quizzed her about it. I said, I'm actually having this author on the podcast. How are you finding it? And she's the 11-year-old who's very closed up and she's like, fine, Mom, it's fine. It's interesting to bringing on that topic of having 2 or 3 different kids and them being completely different and responding differently to things. So I'm finding that is happening a lot. How do we manage that as parents? And do we parent children? Should we parent children differently if they are different?
Yeah, I think what happens is we're doing these internal checks on how a child is actually triggering us and making us feel. And when we say we parent kids differently, if we do, we need to be very intentional and deliberate about it, because sometimes I think we parent kids differently based on our response to our kids' temperaments, and their struggles. The amount of mums I speak to when their kids are going through their friendship dramas around 10, 11, 12 years old, it just brings up all of their old wounds. And so if they're not careful, they can overparent and they can actually come in and be like, the rescuer, and their kids can very much become, that victim place within the relationship. So it's being really intentional, I think, about our response and self-aware. And like you said in the very beginning of this podcast, we've got to be prepared to grow. We've never done this before. So it kind of pulls and stretches us into new places.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't want to screw our kids up, do we? We want to be good parents. We want to make the right decision for them and not have them end up with countless therapy sessions because of things that we've said or done.
All right, Maritza, let's talk to that, okay? The wounds our kids have will always primarily come from our hands, no matter how amazing a job we do, because we are their closest. We are that, safe person in their life that's walked the journey with them, and we can't give them perfection. And I think in this day and age, the things that our parents used to flip off a little bit, we take so seriously, and we internalize everything. But it's that fear that sometimes trips us up from our best parenting moments, because we get in our own way. We have to really do a bad job to stuff our kids up. Like, we really have to be prepared to, get drunk all the time and fly off the handle and abuse them. And that's way too much effort normally for people to do. So let's say if we're showing up and doing our best, we are actually doing the best that we can. And that's all our kids need.
That's so comforting to hear. And I could sit here and ask you my personal questions, and I really love, because even hearing your words is so comforting to hear your advice, and you obviously do this for a living. So you have it's landing in a really great way for me as a parent. But I've been generous enough to ask our community, our audience in advance, and I've let them know that you're coming on, some issues and concerns that they are having as well. And I feel like I'd love to go through some of these questions and concerns with you to see how, you would approach this situation and give them a bit of a helping hand. Would you be open to that?
That sounds good. And these questions are always sent in with a lot of backstory that I'm not aware of. So let's talk about them in a general, most helpful way I possibly can.
All right, amazing. So I think this is one that a lot of us struggle with at the moment, because phone use and social media is very common these days, and there's finding the balance. I know with my personal household, that's probably what we argue about the most. Yeah. So this question here is, my 14-year-old daughter spends a lot of time on her phone. It feels like we are constantly arguing about phone usage and boundaries. How can we find some more peace and balance around this so the house can be more harmonious? Something has to give.
Okay, there's so much in this, all right. Lisa D'Amour says something that's really powerful. So let me quote her words. She says, what is the minimum amount of time your teenager needs to spend on the phone to get what they need to get done, which is connect with their peers and keep up that online presence? And when we're negotiating, I guess, that social media contract and boundary with our kids, I think that's something we can be really honest about with them. Endless time on their phone does not lead to good things. It interrupts our relationship with them. It's not great for their mental health. The research is always really clear, but they still need to be on it. And if we're not negotiating what that looks like with our kids and they don't have some kind of buy-in, there's always going to be tension. I have found for some families that they have become so saturated with tech that they need a little bit of a detox time. In fact, that just like getting that phone out of the way for 3, 4, 5 days and just putting it in like one of those phone jails or an in-charge box actually breaks the circuit, so they can then have those discussions and negotiate something that's going to work. Teenagers have big drivers, Maritza, and tech is leaning into that. And I think we have to get a little bit angry about what it's doing to our kids to stand up to this kind of tension. It's taking advantage of our kids' desire to socialize. It's very addictive. It's playing into all those psychological needs that they have. And unless we step up and really be the captain of that area of their life. They have no hope of standing up against it themselves. I mean, we can barely do it. The same trouble that we have is the trouble that they have, but let's just magnify that.
It's so true. Phone jail sounds like a very good idea. And like you said, it is not just the children that are suffering from this, but it is also us adults. And we have the excuse that we're working and we're online because we're working. And of course, they're like, well, I'm doing what I'm doing and I'm listening to music. And it's just the fact that everything seems to be on that phone. Music is on the phone. The alarm is on the phone.
Yes.
Socializing is on the phone. Even homework these days can be done on a phone. It's the whole life is on that. So I love the fact that they're setting those boundaries. And even if they're not going to like it for a little while, they'll be thankful down the track.
I just thought of something for this, Mum, too. I think the starting point I would say would be, hey, this is really impacting our relationship. And I know how important tech is for you for connecting with your friends and XYZ that they do on it. But the way it's impacting our relationship is not something that I'm happy to leave in this state. So you and I have to work out something that's going to work better, or that phone just can't be a part of our household. Like if it's getting to the point where it really is that much of a struggle.
It's great that you're bringing in that awareness for them to let them know what issues the phone is actually causing. It's not their fault. It's that technology is addictive, and this is actually on technology. It's not on you. So let's work together to get through that as a team rather than butting heads constantly.
And that my relationship with you is more important than anything else in the world. And I'm showing up right now to work through this, and I think that kids respond to that when they hear it coming from our hearts as well.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I think there's a lot in that we can use to start the conversation within the household, and hopefully for that mum find some more harmony, because that's what we're all striving for, right? All right. My second question here is, my 11-year-old struggles finding and keeping friends. Her relationships at school don't seem to last long, and she has very little connection with other kids outside of school. She isn't invited to any parties or play dates. What can I do to help her?
And instantly your heart breaks, doesn't it? Because you know how important their social life is for their development. This is essential stuff. It's not an optional extra for them to have friends. This is important. For some kids who are struggling socially, we need to take that nurturing the gap really seriously. And that might mean that she does need a little bit of help to understand some of the social nuances that other kids pick up a little bit quicker. I've seen changing schools work wonders for some kids, but the research is pretty clear that kids tend to repeat the pattern wherever they go if they don't address what it is in them that is attracting this. So, if it's a repeat cycle, I'd be getting her some help. And the other thing I picked up with this question is that she doesn't have many broad networks outside of school. And I always talk to kids about the importance of having backup friends. You might have your close circle of friends, but your relationship with them can go up and down depending on the mood of the day. And it's so important that they see their friendship circle as bigger than this just small group at school or one or two people that they really bond with. They've got to have people in the street and cousins and, dance friends and like the broadest range that you can possibly have in their life. It makes their life interesting and worth talking about.
That's really, really great advice. And
I'm taking a quick minute to interrupt this life-changing conversation to let you know about something exciting I have created. You might know I'm incredibly passionate about helping people and brands to find and share their voice, especially if that voice is one that aims to create positive change in others. And I've launched a podcast network with purpose. It's called the Guide Your Light Network and features podcasts and voices that inspire, educate and transform listeners. And we have a library of podcasts that are part of our network that truly embody that mission. And we're looking for more. If this has sparked interest in you and you're curious about what it takes to spread your vision and mission on a deeper level, whether you're a purpose-led brand or individual, click the link in the bio and book a call with me to uncover how we can bring purposeful podcasting into your world. Just head over to theguideyourlightnetwork.com or click the link in the show notes.
great advice. And it's so interesting how a conversation that I had yesterday with a mum actually, and she was one of those children and is still one of those adults that doesn't connect very well with people. She said human connection isn't her strong point. And this is an adult speaking, so she's obviously done the work and learnt about herself. But what she does to create connection is she'll go to an art class 3 days a week and be around other people, but can also be doing something else. Can we use what she's doing as a little vehicle, I suppose, for this child as well?
It's so perfect because it's like when we have a common interest or an activity that we do together with people and we get exposed to that same group of people regularly because we're doing that activity with them regularly, there is a higher chance of us forming bonds and relationships. So, a soccer team for a boy might be a great example. And boys tend to bond better through activity anyway than possibly our girls are a little more, chit chat and find common interests through their language. But those activities are super, super important for kids. And let's face it, kids don't have to have a massive, massive range of close friends. Some people don't need that. And I think it's really important to be directed by what this child needs and wants in relationships, not maybe our fear of them not being the most popular or not fitting in. And that can really, really impact how we perceive them as well.
A lot comes back to the parent, doesn't it? And our perception of what is actually going on, because we are, as parents, trying to understand from this point of view what is actually going on, and without being we're obviously wanting to help without hindering. But yeah, it's interesting to see when you stand from different perspectives where things can look so different.
And we've got our expectations, but they've got their genuine, authentic needs, and we need to make sure that they're in line with each other. And sometimes we're pushing our kids beyond their comfort zones or even beyond what they need. And when we're talking about so much of us comes back to us as parents, I mean, even them being in activities where they see kids every week and it's a common interest, that's relying on us paying for that and driving them around. That's just a lot of effort when you have more than one kid. That's a lot.
Yep, I hear you. And then they're not interested in it and you're wondering why you're pushing this project and paying so much and running around like a bat out of hell. It's yeah, that's when you start to question things. Thanks, Michelle. That was really, really helpful. All right, question number 3 is another big one that seems to be coming up a lot in recent years, the dreaded vape. My son has just turned 15 and he has been caught at school using a vape. I was wild with anger. What is the best way to deal with this, as we don't want him doing it again?
Oh, I love it. When I had a psychology clinic, I'm obviously not a psychologist, but I dealt with a lot of the behavior stuff, and parents would sometimes make appointments with me after the school had rung them and told them, that their kid was in trouble for sexting or, vaping or whatever it be. But I would sit them in the office and I'd say, just let fly. And they would just be like, we're going to kill her. I'd say swearing is allowed, and there would be just, let it all out, because parents, you're human too. And I think within this process, when our kids stuff up, what happens is we feel like a failure. And it's so important that we process our emotions away from our kids so we can come to them, not with things that are driving us, because they're the things that repel our kids. All right. So judgments, overreactions, criticisms, pushing confessions, these really big absolute words, them being right and us being, them being wrong and us being right. They're the things that really push teenagers away. And when we look at teenagers and what drives them, it's 2 things, is not being like us. In other words, finding their own independence. And if vaping's the worst thing that, they can do, or the thing that they know we don't want them to do is probably pretty attractive to them. And fitting in with their friends is the other thing. And so they're coming with those really big, actually important drivers, and we want to help direct that in the healthiest way that they possibly can. Some of our kids are going to take bigger risks than others, and parents, it is no reflection on you being the worst parent in the world. It's a lot to do with their temperament and how big those drivers are at the time. And I don't want parents to blame themselves if their kids are making some risky choices. First thing I want parents to do is educate themselves so they don't come off stupid to teenagers. Poor Dylan has an excellent podcast called The Real Deal on Drugs. And he is the authority on vaping. And I would say just get that podcast in your ears. Educate yourself first before you talk to your kids, and then come from it from a health perspective. I think the hardest thing from that point is recognizing that when they leave your house, that front door, they do and can make some of their own decisions. And we are on the other end only being able to respond to that. And that's where our power of control is in our response to them. And we are always better coming out of a point of trying to connect with them than judge or criticize and overreact to them.
Yeah, it's a hard one, is that letting go of some aspect of, tight parenting. When do we start to do that? Is it, it's not obviously an age. It's when you see signs in a child that is desperate for freedom or, their own independence. And how do we do that in a way that won't have them going out and doing crazy things?
Slowly, and you ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen here, especially if you see kids that are risk takers. Some kids who've got quite high levels of confidence too, we can assume that they're going to be okay, but they're the ones that can tend to take more risks as well. So just because they're in a great place socially doesn't necessarily mean they're going to make safe choices. Each kid's different with what they're ready for and the responsibility they're ready to take. But I really want to say to parents as well is that level of responsibility can go up and down quite a lot through those teenage years. And depending on who they're with and who they want to impress, it can have a really big impact on the choices that they do make. Whenever they leave our home, we are really trusting in what's been invested into them. And I want my kids to know that there is nothing that they can do that would ever stop me loving them, or there is nothing that they can do that they wouldn't be able to text or phone me to come and be a support for them and come and get them if they needed me to. We do need to acknowledge that kids can make mistakes, and I think we're best doing that before they leave. Now, Maritza, that didn't completely answer your question. When is the time? We let it out slowly. I think that's what we've got to really, really do. And when they're 12, they're wanting to walk around the shopping mall by themselves and catch a bus by themselves or go swimming at the beach by themselves. And we're sort of going through all the risks in order. What's the risk socially? What's the risk physically? We go through it all in our minds, and I think they're negotiations, and they do come with responsibility. And our kids do need to recognize that they don't just get freedom because they blow out 13 candles on a birthday cake.
Yeah, they need to show the signs of being a bit mature before we can allow it. But I love the slowly part and drips of it to not only make them feel more confident to do things on their own, but actually make the parent, us, more confident to let them out on their own. You're making me actually feel so good. And I hope there's loads of parents out there listening to this saying, you know what, I'm not alone in all of this. And it's so natural and normal what challenges that we're going through with our children that, it's so good to know that there's other people out there that are having the same challenges.
If you go one extreme or the other, I find that parents are either just quite fearful and hold on maybe a little bit too long, and they feel like they have to make too big a jump. But I say to those parents, just let it out slowly and gather your confidence with this letting go thing slowly. So you get the opportunity to give it while you still can. Your kid's not taking it. And then the other extreme is sometimes parents, they're teenagers, let them go for it. So it's finding that balance and finding, I guess, that place that comes from a place with us that realizes they need our love and trust, but also they need our protection. And I've always had this little line that I've said to parents. I've said that I'd never trust a teenager. Hang on. I'd trust them to walk across the road. I'd trust them to do their homework maybe sometimes. I'd trust them to turn up to their part-time job, but I'd never trust them with decisions that are going to change the course of their life, because it's really clear from research that their brain is not developed enough to be able to make those decisions completely on their own.
That's really, really interesting. I wanted to jump into that, just a question that I'm going to throw in here, because you talked about, letting them do things slowly and how some parents do things this way and how other parents do it this way. What if you have two parents in the same house that want to do things differently? Because I've seen that happen a lot, and you can butt heads I think they are allowed to do this. No, I really don't think that that's the case. And then I know as a child myself, I'd always go to mum because mum would always say yes. And I'm like, but mum said yes.
Yeah, yeah. Who's the soft touch in this house?
Yep.
I used to go to my dad. I would always wait for dad to get home because my mum was the strict one. We all have different parenting styles, and it's often based on the way we were parented. And sometimes we lean away from the way we were parented in an extreme way. I think the most important thing in our relationships, like as a couple, is really having time to communicate about why we feel so strongly about why we feel so strongly, So like, why do you really think they should be allowed to go to that party and stay there till 11 o'clock at night? Or why do you think they need to be picked up at 8 o'clock? And if we are blaming and criticizing and being like kind of really judgmental about each other's parenting perspective, we're never going to really hear each other's heart in it, because normally it's somewhere between those two things that our kids really need. The other thing I want to say too is in different seasons of our kids' lives, each one of us, if there's two parents involved, but each one of us tends to relate a little bit more and be more, I guess, helpful for that child's journey. And there can be times where kids are going through some mental health struggles that maybe a parent that is a little bit more low key and more routine based can be like that solid base for a child, and it really connects and works for them. And maybe, let me just take a very stereotypical mum who gets a bit emotional, it repels them a bit more because it's triggering, stirring them up. So it's really important to lean into each other's strengths during different seasons of our kids' lives too, and trust that we're both there for a reason in their lives.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice. Thank you so much for that. All right, question 4 is, I can't keep up with my daughter's mood swings. She's about to turn 15 and is turning our family upside down with her outbursts and her irrational behavior. Something so small can set her off and we feel like we're walking on eggshells. Do you have any advice? Because I have run out of ideas.
And the only way through sometimes is through. Nigel Latta used to say the answer for 13 is 14, the answer for 14 is 15.
My mother-in-law told me that all the time through raising my children.
I just love that, because it's like we want a quick way around these things, and there's often not. Like, it's some days are long, and we have to have a lot of compassion for where they're at, because they don't often get up in the morning and think, I want to be a little pain in the ass today. That they're really overflowing. But within this, Maritza, this is really important to me. I think we sometimes play into a drama cycle a little bit with our girls, and we add our emotion to things, and we don't communicate as clearly as we need to, and it really puts things in a spin. And I want to ask every parent to stop now and think about the emotional preferences that they have. It's not just about their kids. It's not about how their kids feel and what their kids want in that day. In fact, we might say sometimes to our kids, I can't communicate to you about this until you're going to speak to me respectfully. And if that means I can't take you to your friend's house at 4 o'clock because we haven't had this conversation, that's what it's going to mean. So placing some emotional boundaries around ourselves and finding the language to do that. Like, even, the answer is no. And I understand you're going to be really upset, but the answer is still no. So finding some ways around putting some boundaries around what we expect and what we need from our kids is also really, really important in educating them.
Yeah, I love that you are really highlighting their point of view as well, because it makes us as parents really, step out of our own shoes and out of our own paths and realize sometimes we are the parent and we have to step it up, because you can get emotional, you can get heated up, it can trigger you so much, and your reactions aren't the way that you'd plan them to be. So I really do love keep going back to looking at things from their point of view and making sure that we see that.
And we acknowledge that and we validate that, and we sort of just let our kids know that we're on their team and we've got compassion for that. And it's not or, it's and. This is the way I need you to engage with me and treat me. And that two-way street's really important. Sometimes our girls come home with big moods too, is because they can't let it out anywhere else. You know, their friends are not going to put up with it. Their teacher at school's not going to put up with it. And while home needs to be the safe place where they can truly be themselves and vent, it's really important that we don't become a doormat, because I don't think that's teaching our girls really good boundaries either. And our girls really need to know how to use their voice and to set those boundaries.
So I've had a friend who has a daughter who has these comments that fly out of her mouth in the heat of the moment, such as, I'm going to kill myself, and through the tantrum, she'll just blurt out these really strong sentences that stop everyone in their tracks. How do we respond appropriately to comments like that?
So she's venting. And venting actually doesn't make us feel better. It keeps emotions alive a lot of the time. So it's not necessarily leading our kids in a good direction, having them repeat this kind of really loaded language. I'd be asking a girl, what are you really trying to tell me when you say that? And those words are really big words, but I would need to know what you're really trying to tell me. And she might say that, I'm having a really bad day right now. And rah, 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 rah. And I say, okay, next time that you feel like it's all too much, let's get some language that you can use, and I'll really know that this is a big moment for you. I think kids try and get our full attention sometimes by using those words. And I also think they're very inaccurately using language around their mental health. And I think it's really important that we pull them up on it and work with them on it, because it can create more problems for them, and they can talk themselves into things that they don't necessarily need to be traveling towards.
Yeah, it's a big conversation, and I think you've answered that perfectly. Thank you so much. All right, question number 5 is, my son has been bullied in the past. He's about to turn 14, and we feel like the bullying is still going on, but he no longer is talking to us about it. How can we make him comfortable enough to speak up? Should we be going to the school, or do we back off?
Oh, I love this. And this is that typical transition between tweens and teens. The most embarrassing thing for a teenager is not to have any friends. And then the second most embarrassing thing is actually to need your parents' help. So it's no wonder that he's not wanting to talk. Let's come back to some of those things that repel teenagers, those judgments, those criticisms, those overreactions, those pushing confessions. And I find bullying a really interesting one, because when they're being bullied at school and it's deliberate and it's repetitive, they feel very powerless. And sometimes when we step in as parents, what does that make them feel? Equally as powerless. And there's a currency on the playground that might not be right in adult world or adult thinking. That currency is popularity and status, and we might not like it, but this is the currency their world runs on, and they understand the unwritten laws of their social world a lot more than we do. And so when we are trying to have conversations with them about it, I think we need to really understand the social landscape before we do anything. Obviously, if they're in physical danger, there's a point where you do have to step in. But things like, what do you want to do about this? How can I support you? What options are you considering? I just want to remind you that we can go to the police or teachers anytime that you feel that's going to be helpful. And very sadly, when kids do go to schools and report things, it's not always handled well, and they see the impact of that, which makes these disclosures even harder, and really appreciating that our kids are talking to us, and it's more likely they're going to talk to us when they're feeling very, very vulnerable. So these parents are likely to be needing to just sit in the wings and be patient and wait for those moments where their kid does feel vulnerable and reaches out to them. And it's that moment right there that how they respond and what they do really matters. It either builds trust or makes that child feel more powerless.
Have you found useful ways to help them to open up? I mean, maybe just going outside and say, hey, let's play basketball together or something. And then rather than pushing a conversation, is maybe just letting it flow naturally. Is that a great way to start it, I suppose?
Yeah, I think we get obsessed with the conversation, and because we need the conversation more than they need the conversation, they actually just need us to show up and do life with them. And I find when parents are having trouble connecting with their kids, if they can find a regular time every day to do something with that child that you both half enjoy, you're probably going to enjoy it less, but, it might be playing basketball, walking the dog. It could be, could be anything, getting the groceries before dinner, but they know that you're accessible between 4 and 5 at that time. They are likely to talk to you when they really need you. One thing that trips them up is not knowing when to access us. And I think in our busy lives that are quite unpredictable, there's not that pattern or that rhythm for them to access us. So just doing life and being with them and hanging around in the wings has got much more power than we think it has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that so much. All right. So they're the questions that have been sent through. And I feel like you really solidified some really strong answers there. What would you say now, just to give us a sort of a wrap to that, is what are some great tools that we can empower our kids with? Because I know myself as an adult, I've empowered myself with great mindfulness tools and meditation and different things like that I use in my life to center me when things go off track. Mm-hmm. How can we introduce them to tools, and what tools do you feel work best for this age group?
Wow, that's a big question. I actually think the ability to know your voice and be self-aware and have the language around how to communicate that in a way that's respectful for other people is really, really important. So I think the tools would be, what do I really want? Well, one of the questions that we can ask our kids is, what do you really want in this situation, whether it be friends at school or family? How can you communicate that respectfully? And also, how does that impact other people? I think sometimes our kids are very self-focused and they don't have, I guess, that outward focus to be able to, look inward and outward at the same time. So are they tight enough tools, Maritza? How can we break those down together? I just see our kids sometimes expecting other people to be able to read their mind, but also getting so caught up in their own heads that they're not considering how it impacts the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, that's very true. And, it reminds me of a quote that I read, and I had it stuck on the fridge for a long time. I might put it back up, but it was by Neil Donald Walsh. And he said, your life is not about you. It's about those who touch and how you touch them. And I think that nice reminder for any of us really is to remember that, we can speak in a way that is respectful and loving and lead with heart. And it takes that small-mindedness away from what we're going through. And I suppose if we plant that seed with our children early on, they might not get it for the first 10, 15 years, but as they grow up, that seed is still planted, and we can continue to plant those tools and seeds that will help them guide them on their way.
And this one thing might sum it up, but if we could keep asking our kids, what do you have to give in situations, not what do you have to be, not what do you want to, do as a career, but what do you have to give? So no matter what situation it be, whether it's a friendship issue at school or something at home that goes down, how can you contribute? And what's the best way to bring yourself to that situation that's helpful for you and other people?
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful advice. Well, I ask everyone this question on the podcast, and I'd like to ask you it from a perspective of a parent as yourself. So what is something that you could not unhear? Some great advice that someone potentially gave you as a parent that you could not unhear, and that made you see parenting in a different light.
Okay, that parenting's usually difficult when you're doing a really good job of it. And that was given to me by an absolute stranger who walked up to me in the shopping centre when my kids were screaming in a trolley when they were toddler age and could see I was having a bad time. And she cupped my face and she said, parenting is usually difficult, darling, when you're doing a very good job of it. And I think when our kids are in the teenage years, it's even more relevant.
I actually heard I read that on an Instagram tile a couple of days ago, and it stopped me in my tracks as well. So it's a really great one to remember, that we are doing the best that we can with the tools that we've got, And, words of encouragement from people like you and experts who have spoken to thousands and thousands of family, and you've probably seen it all, are so comforting. So I know you've written books. What's the latest on the agenda for you? What have you just birthed?
I'm excited about my book about tweens. It's for parents of kids aged, say, 9 to 12, what kids need now before the teenage years. And we dig into everything from confidence and body image to boundaries to, when to start letting go, and technology and development as well, what's happening inside of their brains. And I'm working on at the moment the sequel to my puberty books. I write books for tweens as well. So those puberty books are a winner, and the Everyday Resilience Journal is for them as well. But I'm working on a book about the whole way of where babies come from topic, which is actually going to be really, really fun. And I hope it makes the conversation a lot easier for families.
You're an unstoppable force in the parenting world, helping families everywhere. Thank you so much, Michelle, for all of your guidance throughout this conversation. We are going to put your links and all of your book links in the show notes so people can continue to learn from you and potentially even hear you speak. I know you do a lot of speaking gigs around the world. It would be an amazing opportunity to have you up front and center to any schools or communities out there that need the help.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for listening to the show. What did you think? And what did you feel? Let us know by leaving me a message on the Things You Can't Unhear Instagram community page. And if you can, give us some ratings love on your favourite listening platform.